So welcome back to Third Age Reforged and to another battle replay and to the last in the rather large series of replays that Winged Swordsman 44 gave to me in one big go, and we are on a very familiar map. There is a reason why I saved this one till last, and it's because it's one that we do tend to see time and again. It is of course Bersergath, much in the same way that Thranduil's Halls was on the last version of the game before the very elongated version we've got now where it was one that we saw fairly consistently. Bersergath seems to have filled that void in this patch, and there are reasons for that ultimately. I think it's because it's a fun map to defend as the defenders, so a lot of players will try to set up games on this particular map with the idea of them being on the defence. And ultimately it can be quite a fun thing for the attackers as well, because there is a little bit more room to manoeuvre. The choke point fighting, while it is fairly consistent throughout the whole settlement, it's not particularly one note, so it is actually a very well crafted settlement from those points of view. So there's a little settlement dug into the side of this cliff, excuse me, hopefully my voice holds together for this last recording in the series. But yes, it is Bersergath. We will be seeing this again. I don't think there's much of a theme to this one either. We're seeing Dorwinion, Lindon and Rhudaur on the defence, and then a rather eclectic mix of armies that are on the attack here, but it should be a rather interesting one nonetheless. So let's get into the attacking armies, starting off here with Joey 1 Kenobi, who is playing as Imladris. Of course, chances are a lot of the attacking army is going to be hidden, because while the palm trees don't seem necessarily like they would give you the kind of cover needed to conceal entire armies, this is a large amount of vegetation, which does in the mechanics of Medieval 2. So, Joey 1 Kenobi's Imladris army. Imladris on the attack represent a rather interesting force. Their quality can be very useful, but it does also leave them quite susceptible to being focused down by defenders, because they will obviously see what sort of threat Imladris and their high quality infantry units in particular do pose. Norrotino warriors I think are a good choice for Joey to have brought because of their abilities in melee. I don't know necessarily if they're going to have the ability to actually use those, because chances are there's going to be a little bit of skirmishing back and forth, but even so, on the off chance they do, they are going to be a better version of archers than the Archers of Rivendell that they could have brought. I think this is 2 units of Imladris sentries. Indeed it is, based on the banners. That's a big investment of money. I mean, it could prove to be a very shrewd investment, but it could also prove to be a complete waste. The Imladris sentries offer a fantastic anchor to an attacking force, but they do also offer a beacon for enemy skirmishers, both throwing projectiles and archers, plenty of which are going to be present in the defending armies today. And this will be one of the first ports of call, because the threat for the defenders is if they do not focus down the Imladris sentries, the late game will be very, very difficult for them to come back from. Now then, Eldarenway Spearmen, a very defensive unit generally speaking. I mean, as a high tier elven unit they will still be very capable of dealing damage, especially against the lower tier offerings from factions like Rhudaur, and even the more lightly armoured elves from Lindon as well may struggle against the more limited damage that spears have to offer. But Eldarenway Spearmen are very, very difficult to kill. Fantastic armour and shield values, in addition to all of the elven defensive skill that you could want. Again, if you combine them with the pikes in front, this makes for a very solid front line. Just in behind, some upgraded Swords of Rivendell as well. I do actually appreciate the fact that Joey has brought them, because it does pad out the army a little bit with the armour upgrade. They are a very efficient unit for their cost, actually, if you get them into pure melee. If they do start to get focused down by enemy skirmishers, even with the armour upgrade, they are one of Imladris' weaker offerings, but you're not going to be able to avoid getting hit with archers here, and I think the defenders will be wanting to focus down some of Imladris' other units, such as the Dorwinion River Wards, Eldarenway Swordmasters and Gwaithir Myrdain back here, the trifecta of Imladris shock infantry, the Dorwinion River Wards being the more basic, for Elven standards anyway, heavy swordsmen, Eldarenway Swordmasters the higher tier version, and then obviously the Gwaithir Myrdain are a bodyguard tier unit, which also include a bit of armour piercing. Just in behind we have the Gwaithir Arthedain, which is going to be the General's bodyguard unit, the most defensive unit of infantry Imladris have. Again, just an even beefier version really of the Eldarenway Spearmen we have already seen. Now then, marching alongside Imladris most directly is the Corsairs and Black Numenorians of Umbar. We have add-in men playing as them. We've got some Corsair infantry who are crouching and hiding in the trees as it stands. We've got some Corsair fencers and Alcarondas Legion who are also just about to reveal themselves. So, throwing projectiles, basic archers combined with light infantry, heavy infantry, some Balagai pikemen to help anchor the line in place. Got a couple of units of Balagai footmen as well, another unit of pikes, armour-piercing shock infantry in the Balak Axe Guard, so nothing too out of place here. Maybe a little bit more numbers heavy than you might see Umbar go. Even as on the attack, Umbar usually will go very quality heavy, which is not too surprising, but again, maybe a few more numbers will be necessary given the fact that Imladris are marching alongside them and they don't really have too much options, or too many options I should say, when considering lower tier units. Balak Axe Guard, Castamir's Rangers, attacking Rangers, somewhat difficult to use on Bersergath, but not impossible, and obviously the reward for the attackers using their range as well is pretty much making the game impossible for the defenders to win, so just the threat of Rangers may be enough to really worry the defenders here. Corsair crossbows are going to be a little bit easier to use. The stopping power of crossbows like this, very, very dangerous for the defenders as well, not the sort of thing they can ignore, but fortunately for them, the Corsair crossbows are among the most fragile unit of crossbows when it comes to trying to deal with arrow fire. Balagar archers will be hoping to skirmish with the enemy, and another unit of very high-end shock infantry as the trees pop back in. Harbingers of Castamir, with Castamir himself marching with them. Now then, what we can see of Arthedain's army, played by Ellipsis. We have got some Arthedain pikemen with the armour upgrade, like I've said before. Arthedain, very much well known for their cheap and cheerful is probably the wrong way of putting it, but efficient pike units. We've got some Wardens of the North here as well, which is the General's bodyguard unit. Obviously, armour-piercing projectiles we've already mentioned, with the crossbows can be very, very deadly. The steel bows no less so. The rest of the Arthedain army is hidden. Probably plenty of Dunedain here in for the deal. Then we have Gondor, played by Pemberton. We've got some Pelagia Marines. Javelins will be very useful for trying to break up the blocks of defensives that the defenders will be trying to lay on for them in the choke points that Bersergath has to offer. Guards of Osgiliath and Nimlothian Honour Guard and Fountain Guard. Plenty of pole arms here for the Gondorians, as you'd expect. Gondor Spearmen with the first level of armour upgrade. Gondor Militia Infantry. Wardens of the White Tower, Ravenhelms of Caer Andros, Gondor Infantry and Axemen of Lasarne. I mean, you kind of know what to expect with Gondor. I do like them and how they're designed as a faction, but you will very often see them bringing the same kind of things. It really just... the amount of individual units that they bring is one of the things that will shift back and forth a bit, but you're always going to see certain things. And finally, Proxima Centauri. I suppose the one focus that we can have on this battle, the one theme, is that Mordor have conquered most of the known world at this point and are trying to deal with the few remaining holdouts. So Proxima Centauri has the honour of being his team's de facto team captain, based on what I've said there. Moran on halberds, we've got some orc fodder, I'd imagine. Yes, Olag High, maybe a little bit more quality centric with Uruk captains, temple executioners and temple guard. Sauron's will. Be surprised not to see the Nazgul as well, but a troll catapult. Bersergath can be very, very fertile hunting grounds for artillery, both attacking and defending, based on the kind of choke points that are within the city. Blackguard of Barad-dûr, we've seen Great Shield Infantry be used to very good effect lately on the defence as well, actually, in Rohan's case. Orc Javelins and Temple Guard, like I said. Not seeing any Nazgul initially, but still plenty of quality, and plenty of the army will still be hidden, of course. Now then, moving on to the defenders, first of which is Diego Rio Ramos, who's playing as Dorwinion. So he has got 2 units of Glade Masters, which is a sign, of course, of the fact that there are only 3 armies on the defence. Plenty of money to spend, and the Glade Masters will be good at pretty much everything, actually, or against pretty much everything that the attackers have brought. They're one of those very difficult kind of units to counter. The one thing that they have against them, of course, usually is their price, making them prohibitively expensive to bring too, but also their defensive values, if you can start targeting them down with ranged units, can be a bit of a problem, but if you're using your defensive terrain correctly, that shouldn't be too much of an issue. The Elvelyn Hammerguard may lack the grace of their elven companions, but they do have the armour piercing, they do have that shield and heavy armour as well, which makes them just that little bit more resilient all round, which is probably why the general is there. Nandor Glade Guard are hidden, basic unit of shock infantry. The Morroquendi pikes will be very important to the defenders here, trying to clog up those roads in the settlement with pikemen. Plenty of Elvelyn infantry and Elvelyn Vineguard making up the numerous front lines. The Elvelyn are very dependable. They're not going to be match winners, but they will offer the defenders a good amount of numbers to mount their defences with. Morroquendi bows and Elvelyn marksmen will be hoping to do a lot of damage in range as well. Morroquendi bows with higher base damage and poison arrows, which will be good at dealing with some of the lower morale enemies, which actually Mordor probably fall into that. Gondor and Arthedain may be a little bit more susceptible to that as well, the Umbar and Imladris. Defensive artillery in the catapult as well, and some Morroquendi Glade Lords. Interesting to see how the cavalry will behave, because, I mean, the defenders should have the edge there, even with just one unit. This isn't going to be a very cavalry-centric battle. Going to have to watch out for Darth stakes that he's deployed in this little canyon, however, with a couple of units of Lindon Guard waiting for the enemies to march down the canyon. The rest of the Lindon army, I imagine we're going to see plenty of quality, and indeed we are. One unit of Noldor and Blade Masters, but a mighty 4 units of Noldor and Guard. Under normal circumstances this would be unheard of, but a large amount of them here, and that's a lot of quality. Also will go some way to mitigating Lindon's usual worries when it comes to armour. Mithlon Swordmasters will also be important, that base damage, that defensive skill. Harland and Infantry, useful if they can fold themselves in with the more heavily armoured Elvelyn. They'll make for a pretty interesting duo. Mithlon Marines, first example of some throwing projectiles that we've seen from the defenders. They'll be very, very useful, very, very necessary, I think, focusing down some of the quality units that the attackers have. Mithlon Pikemen are here, and also probably one of the most important units on the field for them today, the Wardens of Elos Tyrion. Elven Rangers have that extra point of damage, which is a big force multiplier when you're talking about body-piercing projectiles. Now then, finally, Winged Swordsman himself is playing as Rhudaur. When it comes to throwing projectiles, that will be the main thing that Rhudaur can offer. Usually we see them on the attack, actually, proving that in siege battles, but now they have the opportunity to really do that on the defence. Trollshot Axe Throwers will be one such unit. More Trollshot Axe Throwers. Arthedain Pikemen, we've already seen pikes from both of their fellow defenders, and they will be no less useful coming from Rhudaur than they will be from their allies. Ettenwall's Troll Hunters, 2 units of Berserkers as well, so going into the red limit on their really high-end units. Rhudaur will be doing this as well. Units of Witch-Realm Enslavers with that armour piercing. Looks like just 1 unit of Rodram Javelins is just squished up against the wall. Plenty of basic archers as well, just to get involved in that mudslinging contest with the attackers. Arthedain Rangers as well, they may not be quite as damaging as the Wardens of Elos Tyrion, but if either one of them lives up to their potential, it will make life significantly more difficult for the attackers than it otherwise would be. Arthedain Pikemen, Rodram Javelins and Rhudaur Swordsmen back here, and there are a few more units back here with some Black Walls and some more Rhudaur Swordsmen, so nothing too out of the ordinary. Plenty of throwing projectiles, bit of armour piercing, good quality from all the defenders, which they will sorely need, because as much as Bersergath is a popular map for the defenders to tend to pick, it's also one that we actually rarely see victories for the defenders on. Usually the attackers in 5v3s are able to be victorious here, and that's usually because the attackers are able to figure out ways of exploiting the defensive positions that the defenders actually take up. We'll see if that proves to be the case here. As is usually the case on this map, there will be a bit of a lengthy cut because there's so far for the attackers to move, unless the Morroquendi Gladelords do a madness and try to go alone against the enemy, in which case we will be joining a little bit more quickly, but I highly doubt it. We will rejoin, however, when the battle is about to get underway. So perhaps a slightly faster start to proceedings from the defenders than I was expecting here, as the first few volleys from these Lindon Guard have been loosed. I don't know whether it's just because they were in fire at will stance or not, but they got a good 3 or so volleys off before they actually ceased, so I'm not entirely sure. I don't really know what there is. I mean, yes, the Morannon Halberds I think would be a good target. Bombarding the position from on high with that artillery, getting good hits, but on units which aren't terribly important to the attackers. You could argue the Blackguard of Barad-dûr represent one of the bigger threats to the defenders that are on the field here, but we shall have to wait and see on that front. Certainly I would say in terms of mass, the attackers should be really trying to bully the defenders as much as they can. That, and with their skirmishes, I think are where they can really start to make a big impression in this battle. I mean, both Lindon and Rhudaur certainly, but even Dorwinion to a lesser extent, are going to hold up pretty poorly if the attackers decide to take the slower route and skirmish with the enemy, play tag with them a little bit, because they simply don't have the staying power in that kind of fight, Lindon and Rhudaur especially, for it to go all that well for the defenders. I mean, it's a long battle as well, it's nearly 50,000 frames long, so I have to imagine there's going to be some level of caution shown by the attackers, purely because it would be a shorter battle if they decided to just throw caution to the wind. Interestingly enough though, so far only attacking units have perished. Mordor going to be the first ones in with some halberds. Javelins also, are they going to set themselves up immediately? Again, this is the kind of thing which is going to be awkward for the elves to have to try and deal with. There are some archers in behind somewhere. Yeah, Rhudaur marksmen going after them. I mean, they kind of need to. As much as the Orc Javelins are not a particularly expensive unit, they cannot afford to allow the Orc Javelins to simply have their way with the front line, which includes Rhudaur pikes, as much as this front line with the pikes sticking out just in front of the line infantry usually would be a really bad thing, but with the Rhudaur pikemen, of course, being that they're shielded, it isn't as much of a problem. But it is with javelins, because the javelins will punch right on through that shield value, the armour-piercing damage that they deliver. Throwing axes would be somewhat mitigated by the shields as well, though, but I don't know if the attackers actually have any throwing axes. I wouldn't have thought so, given the factions that are on display. Still more artillery damage being done. Dorwinion's catapult continuing to do their thing. The fallen Gondorians and Arthedainians marching in step with Mordor. The other armies over here, which are taking a little bit longer to shift themselves into position, you'd have to say, with Imladris among their number and Umbar, obviously two very high quality factions. Even when they're on the attack like this and they have to cut corners in terms of their quality somewhere, it is still going to be a bit of a worry perhaps for the defenders, the level of units that they're having to deal with. What's going on over here? Got Rhudaur swordsmen. I mean, this is a little bit peculiar. Is this a pathway that the attackers could have taken? I think it is, you know. Something that perhaps Bersergath has never truly shown us would be this pathway that goes right the way around, but I don't think you can actually take too much. Well, actually, I guess you could. If you can get up all the way over to here as an attacker and you put your archers over here, it really defangs the defenders in this part of the settlement, but perhaps there is a reason why they haven't done that, but it is worth saying that that unit of Rhudaur swordsmen has got a long way to march before it's actually going to be useful in this battle. They're going to have to take the same route that the attackers did. Not the most efficient hammer and anvil strike. I mean, this is a bit of a problem here. Rhudaur do need to deal with that very depleted unit of Orc Javelins still, because otherwise they're going to be able to utilise all their ammunition here, which means in the long run they'll be able to do the same amount of damage as if they had their full strength unit. It'll take them much longer, and surely the battle is going to get underway before then anyway. This yeah, looking like we've got some death being inflicted. The Mordor troll catapult trying to shoot down here. I mean, it's got a longer sight line, so I think that is a good call by Proxima Centauri, and also there's pretty bunched up units over here. So far Dorwinion has got very, very fortunate really to have only lost a small amount of units. The Grey Company are moving forward. This is flying very close to the sun here. In fact, really, they're going after the very bunched up Elvelyn infantry, but I'm a little bit surprised Diego Rio Ramos wasn't paying attention there, because that was a golden opportunity to charge in with the Vanguard and kill off more of the Grey Company there. In the end they only managed to get one rider. The upshot is, from Dorwinion's point of view, is that the Grey Company didn't really shoot at the kind of targets that Dorwinion will mine such a high priority skirmish are going after, but like I said, the attackers can afford to be a little bit more blasé with their high profile skirmishes, because they don't need all of them to be efficient to the max, especially not rangers, but certainly the defenders will. Horns of Elostirian and Rhudaur Rangers being among their number, they will be extremely important. Only 2 Orc Javelins remain, and are they actually projectile throwers? They are, so still being more of an annoyance than anything else. Right, we're going up to times 6 speed here, because this is getting a little bit antagonising. It always is when you've got one of these slow boil battles, but perhaps my patience for Bersergath as a map is starting to wear a little thin. I'm glad at least that before this one was shown, there has at least been an attempt to broaden people's horizons in the online multiplayer scene when it comes to playing different siege maps. It's always used to be the purview of Thranduil's halls, the map that we saw over and over again, but once again the crown has well and truly been passed for the last while. Some sort of Rivendell moving in, so Imladris, interestingly enough, the first ones to dive headfirst into a melee engagement. I mean, certainly the sort of Rivendell with an armour upgrade 1-to-1 will do quite nicely against Elvelyn Vanguard, because the Elvelyn simply won't be able to deal damage as quickly as the Elven infantry they're facing off against, but they are relatively low in number. Dorwinion have got plenty of reinforcements that they can commit, but I'm actually a little bit surprised that defeat seems certain. I mean, I'm no doubt that will flick back around once it becomes clear that the Elvelyn Vanguard are not really dealing damage. And the sort of Rhudaur will, albeit slightly at a slightly reduced pace, given the heavy armour the Elvalin wear, the only heavily armoured contingent really among the defenders, which ties into what I was saying earlier. I do not know if this arrangement of defenders was the way forward. I feel as though, I mean, Rhudaur and Lindon both offer an awful lot for defenders, but they both have more or less the same weakness, which if the attackers, when the attackers really do decide to turn up the pressure, could prove to be a real problem. You want more Rhudaur projectiles coming in. I don't know if it's necessarily all that relevant going after Orc fodder, especially not with Arthedain Rangers. That seems a little bit wasteful to me. If you could see them around on Halberds and Sauron's will, it becomes a little bit different, but yeah, Arthedain Rangers, they've got to be on fire at will. There's no way anyone in their right mind would be using Rangers on Orc fodder. That in itself is going to make the defenders' lives very difficult. Lindon Guard, yeah, the Rangers go back into hiding, presumably answering our question for us. Projectiles, I mean, going after Pemberton's Gondor infantry, a little bit more high quality, a little bit more heavy duty than the lowly Mordor orcs that we have seen thus far. Well, see a little bit more coming forward. Corsair infantry, I'm a little bit surprised because I didn't see initial skirmish from the Corsair infantry from Arthedain men, which you would expect in this sort of situation. But no, reinforcements however coming in from the defenders as well. I mean, with the Morroquendi pikes shoring things up with a few more, well, with any of the Elvalin infantrymen in behind as well to be recommitted, these lighter units of infantry are not going to be enough to get through, which is always going to be the problem. Unless the defenders really take their eye off the ball, there's going to be no shortcuts if you're an attacker. Grey Company, meanwhile, shooting at point blank, and they're going to do a lot of damage there because that is a big group that are blobbed up. So it's actually not a bad play, this, from Ellipsis, because he's got a good opportunity to do a lot of damage to an initial defence, and it really will set the scene for the rest of the battle, this kind of thing. Arrows being loosed, Balagai footmen in behind, Norotino warriors are also there. Elvalin marksmen are returning fire, but even this, I mean, the Grey Company are going to be able to do enough damage before they get killed off to have been a worthwhile addition. You can see here that the Mithlond Marines taking some hits. I mean, all of these units are shielded from the front, but like I said, when it comes to dealing with ranger projectiles, it's less of a concern. Very densely packed Elvalin infantry taking an awful lot of hits. I mean, any units that don't die as well will be weakened for later on. Battered and bloodied for what will be a long road ahead for the defenders if they are to be victorious in this battle. Defeat seems certain for them. Balagai footmen waiting to move in. Norotino warriors using their own ammunition. I don't quite know how successful they're going to be at banking their shots, and yeah, you can see they're firing right up into the air, so not going to be terribly damaging, but it will put the defenders under a little bit more pressure. They're also going after, I think, that unit of Vine Guard, which at that point you may as well go after the Morroquendi pikes, even if you are a little bit more likely to get a bit of friendly fire. Meanwhile, Orc fodder over here, I mean, you can see plenty of dead Orc fodders from the first couple of volleys from the Arthedain Rangers that we've already seen. Still all quiet on this front, and you can see that still there's 2 Orc javelins slowly but surely poking away at this Rhudaur front line, and they can't even counterattack with infantry now that the Orc fodder are in the way. An early warning system of sorts for Mordor there. Meanwhile, Troll Catapult getting a lot closer to the action now, having already, I mean, they did some damage, but not as much as perhaps the attackers would have been hoping for from artillery. Another example of a unit, really, that the defenders really can't afford to give free rein to. And already, I don't know, I think the attackers have started off this battle pretty well. Cranking the artillery into place. Yeah, this is exactly the sort of thing. I mean, if Diego didn't learn his lesson from the Grey Company already doing an awful lot of damage, then he deserves to take those casualties, to be honest, because that was poor. Nandor Glade Guard are moving in to try and help hold things down on the front line with the arrival of some Gondor spearmen, but shouldn't be too much of a problem here with the addition of those Morroquendi units. The infantry, though, isn't the issue here. It's the huge amount of casualties they're taking at the hands of the attacking artillery. And there are ways and means they could have mitigated this. I mean, for a start, don't bunch up all of your units in broad daylight right in front of the artillery, and so far, it's gone very well. That is also a little bit disastrous, a little bit of friendly fire. So far, you have to say it's going absolutely horrendously for the defenders, unfortunately for them. The troll catapult is going to leave though, because clearly that's what the defending catapult has been tasked with, trying to finish off this catapult, but the damage has already been very much done. Lots of crispy Dorwinion corpses. They definitely need to keep an eye on that, you know. And my patience for players making these kind of errors on maps like this is pretty slim, because you're focusing on one choke point as Dorwinion there. You really, really shouldn't be allowing such things to happen, whether it's having your own catapult in place before then, or you know, just in some way keeping your eye on the ball a little bit more so than that. Lindon guard still in place. What are they actually going after here? Nothing by the looks of things. So still very much a quiet front line over here. Are the Orc going to move in? No. Are they content to just allow those two Orc Javelinmen to slowly but surely do as much damage as possible? I don't know, given the presence of some Gondorians now arriving on the front line. I mean, you know, Gondor infantry certainly makes any sort of infantry-based counter-attack significantly less likely. But oh well. We've seen a few examples of the defenders being very aggressive lately. That isn't going to be the case here, but Bersergath maybe doesn't lend itself as well to that kind of fight anyway. So it's perhaps a little bit more understandable. Nandor Blade Guard certainly going to be doing the business here on the front line against more basic units of Gondorians. They'll cleave through Corsair infantry with impunity. The Morroquendi in general actually will be one of the better choices as well for facing off against the Axemen of Lasarnak. But then again, the Axemen will also be better off against Dorwinion anyway, because any Helvellyn infantry units are where they will be at their most efficient. So that's most certainly worth bearing in mind also. Arrow fire still being traded back and forth, but nothing too decisive really. And that plays very much into the hands of the attackers as well. Plenty of Umbar, and doesn't look like any more elves have been added to the front line since that initial unit of Swords of Rivendell began the assault over here, which is maybe understandable given their smaller army in general. Looks like we've got another unit of Swords of Rivendell moving forward as well, but stuff like the Imladris sentries is where the defenders will be worried as the battle moves. Still nothing going on over here, still very happy to do the small bits and pieces of damage that those two Orc Javelin men are willing to do. And I mean, you may as well finish the job at this point. You've invested so much ammunition into those Orc Javelins that it would be the worst thing actually to allow them to use up all their ammunition now from a Rhudaur perspective. One volley is maybe, it's not an efficient volley by any means, but you need to finish that unit of Orc Javelins, because Proxima Centauri is in no rush. He's very willing to do the business in that way. Emmerdim archers taking hits from the Lindon guard as they move forward. Arthedain marksmen also taking damage. I mean, again, examples of units which I don't think the attackers will mind too much being under this kind of pressure, especially seeing as Ellipsis can now also return fire, which any of the Lindon archers are not really going to do as well in a skirmish battle like that. As archers from other factions attacking artillery being moved once again. Good use of the troll catapult here. Again, we're seeing the advantage of it being able to move more quickly across the battlefield, cover more ground. And where it was terrorising Dorwinion, it's now making Rhudaur's life a little bit more difficult than it otherwise would be. Certainly not as decisive hits as we've seen thus far, but any hits from this point on. Good hit there on some troll short axe throwers. We are now seeing the beginnings of a melee engagement over here as well. Finally, the Crown of Iron Pikemen will be able to do what they do best, which is holding infantry at arm's length. Speaking of infantry though, really, really good use of the troll catapult. I mean, it's always a little bit, it always comes down a little bit to chance artillery. Sometimes it'll work for you, sometimes it just won't, but I have to say on this occasion, he's at least given the artillery the best chance to do well in Proxima Centauri, and his artillery has repaid that good faith. Plenty of fire arrows coming forth, but I think that's actually proving to be more of a hindrance to the attackers here, because the Corsairs that are on this front line are pretty likely to panic and run as a result of this kind of pressure. More arrows archers being utilised, Arthedain warriors moving forwards. The elves also trudging their way upfield. And that is maybe the problem with this shape of terrain for the attackers, is even if the enemy archers miss their first target, there's often units in behind which they can hit instead. Some Gondorians on the way forward as well, some Gondor infantry, so some good interplay here between the attackers. I mean, when it's singular choke points such as the ones that Bersergath offers, it's not the most difficult task to keep your army organised, and that is one of the reasons why it's so difficult for the defenders to pick up victories on this map at the best of times. Arthedain warriors not the most heavily armoured though, so this pressure they're receiving from the defending archers is going to have an impact. Balagai footmen are going to move forward. You can see, however, the effectiveness of the Morroquendi and the High Elves from Lindon on the front line, the anchor that they have as well with the more heavily armoured humans from the east, is certainly a very nice front line to have, but now with some fully upgraded, no actually some singular armour upgrade on that Gondor infantry there, but some armour upgraded Gondor infantry and some Imladris sentries, the attackers are also going to continue to turn up the pressure a little bit, and with the Morroquendi pikes having already seen a lot of combat here, only 14 of them remaining, the attackers now going to try at the very least and establish themselves in that way. Ranulf halberds moving forward with the Gondor infantry, bit of Sauron's will on the front line as well, but so far Rhudaur have got enough numbers on the front line that this attack thus far at the very least hasn't been terribly effective, you have to say. But these battles very often are decided by the effectiveness by which a faction uses their skirmishers, and it's often very difficult, as I very often say, in a siege battle to keep good track of, especially regular archers. You can see the arrows whizzing back and forth. Ooh, that was clear projectiles from somewhere. The Grey Company once again being used. Another example of a fast-moving unit that's capable of dealing a lot of damage quickly, which has been used very nicely by the attackers so far. Between that and the Troll Catapult, done well. Troll Shot Axe Throwers on the front line already looking like routing him. With the support from the Grey Company and those Arthedain marksmen down on the lower levels, all of a sudden this front line is starting to turn in favour of the attackers already, which is certainly not what the defenders would have been hoping for. Plenty of Rhudaur reinforcements though, that's the good thing for them. Plenty of money to spend, but also plenty of numbers from a faction like Rhudaur that can be used to make up their army. Meanwhile, still looking like the defenders have got the edge on this front line over here, which is kind of interesting. See plenty of Elvelyn, still actually a surprising amount of Nandor Glade Guards still in here as well, considering they are reasonably fragile. I mean, they've got decent melee defense, but not a lot of armor, and even then they are intended as like a more pure example of shock infantry. Going to try and anchor the line in place once again with more Elven pikes, this time from the Mithlon pikemen. I mean, Lindon are a pike-based faction. We rarely see them, just in general really, but even rarer do we see them really invest in their pikes. Yes, the Imladris ones are individually stronger, but Lindon can often field far more, and that can be a very, very useful thing for a defending force. They are a little bit blobbed up though. And part of the problem here that the Mithlon pikemen are going to have is their low armour is really going to play into this, because it means the Imladris sentries will be able to do damage to them far more efficiently than vice versa. Pikes don't do damage particularly quickly, but against more lightly armoured targets with lower stats like pikes are, very much going to be in the ascendancy there. Still arrows being launched in behind, and this is another good example really of the attackers just using their skirmishers. Yes, hitting the front of Elvelyn infantry and Elvelyn Vanguard isn't going to be the most efficient thing. I mean, of all of the defending infantry units, this is what the defenders would choose to get hit by such things, but if this continues, they're still going to take too many losses as a result of this for it to be sustainable. 5v3s are very unforgiving for the defenders when it comes to what sort of units you can count as disposable. Which often runs contrary to the way Rhudaur played, I have to say. I mean, plenty of throwing axes now being utilised. The Troll Catapult crew, having already expended all their ammunition, now being used as a cudgel in melee, trying to help out against the lighter Lindon units trying to help buckle the Rhudaur pike line as well. And on both sides, I think, but especially over here, we're starting to see the attackers really gain a good bit of momentum in this fight. Several units of those troll short axe throwers in behind. Some of those troll hunters are close by, but I mean, they're going to have to use their ammunition pretty quickly. You can see as well Ravenhelms have been committed forward by Pemberton, and they will be pretty good in close quarters with pretty much everything Rhudaur has to offer. I mean, I like the committal of the Black Walls to the front line because they will make very quick work of the Troll Catapult crew and help re-establish the Arthedain pikemen on the front line as that anchor, and then you can go about the business of recovering this front line quite nicely, which with the close fire support from the Essenwalls, Troll Hunters and Axe Throwers should be okay. What are they going after? Gondor Archers. I think we're seeing a lot of examples of the defenders being a little bit gung-ho with their skirmishers, like Gondor Archers. I really don't think Troll Shore Axe Throwers should be going after them. I think they should be going after something a little bit juicier in terms of the targets that are on offer. But perhaps I am wrong. It happens on occasion. Arthedain Rangers are in position, I mean, they can do a lot of damage quickly from that position. The attackers, to be fair, they do need to make sure that this assault is able to keep going, and they are running a little bit lower on manpower on this front line now. Ran on halberds on the way forward, going to try and help anchor things in place. They would be a welcome addition, but again, the armor piercing not going to be as useful against the Lindon and Rhudaur units they're going to be facing off against, but they just need some infantry on the front line at this stage, and those Gondor Archers were out of ammunition as well, which is another sign that those Troll Shore Axe Throwers were well and truly wasting their ammunition. Kills were inflicted, but not at the level that was required. Artillery is there, but I mean, there's a lot of units still waiting for their moment to be called forth to the front line. I don't know if the artillery is in the ideal place to be taking advantage of that. We can see another unit of pikes being sent forward, this time from Umbar, some Balagaya pikemen, just to help keep this assault going. I have to say, actually, there's not an awful lot of those Imladris pikes left on the front line now, is there? Not a lot of the Lindon ones left, so I don't really know what's been happening over here, but something has befallen both sides. Once again, though, it's the attackers that are slowly but surely making incremental progress here, which is worrying for the defenders. See here, Corsair crossbows, another example of a skirmisher that can be moved into place. Yes, they're fragile, yes, they're an obvious target for the defending archers, but just a few good volleys from the Corsair crossbows and it's really going to have a bit of a domino effect later on for the defenders. Arthedain warriors ballooning a few shots high. What's going on over here? Well, they have stabilised a little bit on this front line, the defenders, but the attackers can afford to engage in this kind of warfare for far longer than the defenders can on this occasion. Once again, Orc Javelins proving to be a bit of a worry. The Orc Javelins hitting the Rhudaur swordsmen that are just in behind, ready to reinforce the front line should they be needed. See here some squeezing in from the sides of this front line now as well. Sauron's Will leading the way with their superior damage. They are coming up against Black Walls, however. Still, we're seeing good arced shots from Arthedain marksmen and Gondor archers. Not the most damaging archers by any means, but like I said, they don't need to be against Rhudaur. Functional archers will do the job just fine. Atomals, Troll Hunters, you can see there is a good amount of routing though, this time from Mordor. Around on halberds running for the hills, not an awful lot on this front line, so maybe trying to undersell this defending front line a little bit. I mean, Harland and infantry are giving the Rhudaur units a hand, the damage dealing capabilities of the Black Walls as well, so maybe taking the infantry presence here a little bit lightly, but more and more of these archers are finding targets. A little bit of a counter-attack here. I mean, the Orc Javelins have had to leave the area as a result of that, their infantry assault falling apart, so this is good news for the defenders, and it's about time they had some. Harland and infantry going to be able to push back against these skirmishers now. There's some infantry nearby. They may well be needed, depending on how aggressive the defenders would now like to be, given that collapsing front line. You are. over here. Presence of the Balagai pikemen, and actually things turning around over here as well. Once again, it's coming about as a result of a little bit more support from the ranged units in behind, but also some reinforcements on the front line. More Elvellyn have been added in since last we saw what was going on over here. Those Mithlon Marines, I mean, as soon as they're out of ammunition as well, their presence will be very much appreciated on the front line. Very much like the Seafarers of Nindamos from Numenor. Yes, obviously their damage-dealing capabilities with their javelins are the most important thing, but they can also double as decent medium infantry in melee, and everyone is going to have to do their part in the melee fight if the defenders are to win this. The anchoring effect these Balagai pikes are having is actually saving the attackers from suffering a similar collapse over on this side to what they did on the other. One thing that's worth bearing in mind though, as much as the Gondorians have sent over a little bit of support, Umbar and Imladris can't afford to be quite as all-in terms of their approaches. The three armies that are on the other side, one of which being Mordor, means they're going to have plenty more manpower to burn through. This is a counter-attack, but maybe too much of a bold counter-attack for me, with the Harlanded infantry moving forwards. I mean, yes, they're going to be able to defeat Arthedain man-at-arms in melee, as well as Gondor infantry, but it's a matter of numbers here, and with a little bit of close support, every elf is going to count in the defence later on, so if you lose any unnecessarily now, especially given how the defenders started this battle, amusingly enough, still that one Orc Javelin over there, still doing his thing. His buddy died, but he's doing his best. Rhudaur marksmen now on the front line, pulling out their hand axes. Rhudaur swordsmen are in behind, still trying to loop those projectiles over. What's going on there? Dunedain Troll Slayers, was that? What are they going after over here? Yeah, it is the Troll Slayers. I mean, they're very useful in melee as well, but is that really a good target to go after? I mean, certainly the Reforged Javelins would be a good target, but vice versa is also true from a Rhudaur perspective, as they now move forward. A little bit delayed there. I think if he was going to do this, Winged Swordsman, he should have done it a little bit sooner to support this unit of Harlanded infantry. Maybe they now see the opportunity. I mean, these Dunedain Trolls, they're taking an awful lot of damage as well from the archers that are in behind. Olag High now moving forward, but I'm saying, given the rough start to the battle the defenders had, they've rallied pretty well, and they are now starting to inflict some decent wounds on the attackers. I mean, yes, the Olag High coming in here to shut down the Reforged Javelins, but as far as an anti-troll unit in melee goes, the Reforged Javelins are probably one of the scarier units the Olag High could hope to face from the defenders. Unless the Blade Masters are on the field, and the Noldorin Blade Masters, those two Elven units, would be even worse to have to deal with. Yeah, and the Rhudaur marksmen broken fighting to the death. So, as much as you may not think so, I mean, having 70 Rhudaur marksmen in the late game could well prove to be a big difference maker, and they were ultimately wasted a little bit. You can see Uruk captains also now moving forwards, going to try and do their thing. A bit of sunk cost fallacy going on here if he intends to commit the Black Bolts, maybe with that that charge he was hoping to do more damage to the Olag High, but that hasn't proved to be the case. A little bit surprised here. This one unit of Black Bolts shouldn't be causing this much confusion among the attackers, but such is the way of things. Meanwhile, over here, another unit of Morroquendi pikes being sent forward to reinforce this front line, so still as unmoving as ever, perhaps, is what we can say about this portion of the front line. Still a few Imladris sentries on the front line, but very depleted at this stage. Those Morroquendi pikes are still in a block-like formation. If those Mithlon Marines are out of ammunition, they may as well be committed at this point to the sides of the front line, because things aren't looking too healthy on the flanks of this front line. And I mean, they're getting hit by those throwing projectiles from the Corsair fences anyway, so you may as well die in melee rather than getting skewered by getting one of the fences throwing knives through your forehead. The sides of this front line did need reinforcing, which will cease some of the momentum that Imladris has. Elvellyn marksmen continuing to fire their missiles, and again going after a good choice in target as well in the Corsair crossbowman. Morquendi bows also joining in. I mean, the poison projectiles could be an interesting thing. Like I said, the Corsairs, not the most resilient in terms of morale, so routing the enemy is certainly a viable tactic for the defenders to try to go for here, but I mean, it can apply to them as well, of course. You do need to be a little bit careful. Some of the Elvelyn Vanguard, some of the very depleted units, already a little bit shaken up. Let's have a look. Harlingen Guard. Oleg High now moving on to the front line, having that one unit of Black Rolls already being completely overwhelmed. You can see the Ferocian Javelins are in there though, and with those Rhudaur pikes still holding things down nicely on the front line. Harlingen Guard can be added to the front as well. I mean, yeah, the presence of those Ferocian Javelins is a real saving grace here for the Rhudaur pikemen, otherwise the Oleg High would be doing their job very efficiently. Lots of more Gondorians and Arthedainians now adding to the front line. I mean, already seen some Guards of Osgiliath, also the armour upgraded Arthedain pikemen, so trying to go pike to pike against Rhudaur, but with superior numbers, this could prove to be a good idea, but this is the sort of thing which is attracting the attention of the Rhudaur Rangers, who themselves are attracting the attention of some of the attacking archers now, as well they should. From an attacking perspective, the Rhudaur Rangers are one of the main priorities to try and, at the very least, blunt, if not kill off completely. Troll Hunters and Harlingen Infantry moving in. Ooh, Blackguard of Barad-dûr, this could be a key moment in this fight. If this front line is allowed to be blown through, given what Rhudaur are committed to this front line at this point, that would be a real tragedy. Proxima Centauri trying to push through with Blackguard of Barad-dûr. Ellipsis is going to follow through as well with some Evendim Spearmen, and he has found a gap here. Any infantry reinforcements that can be mustered are going to need to be sent to this front line if they intend to save it. If they intend to make this more of a rearguard action, the defenders, then it's not the end of the world if they leave most of these units behind to perish. Essenwall's Troll Hunters trying to do as much damage as they can, as quickly as they can. Still there's Arthedain pikemen, some Gondor infantry making their way forwards as well. Balance of forces evenly matched.
Only half the enemy force remains.
And the Blackguard of Barad-dûr's main area of expertise is not actually being in melee as such, it's just running through the melee fight. Well, Grey Company, I don't know how much ammunition they necessarily have left, but alongside the Evendim Spearmen on foot is another attempt by Arthedain to sow some chaos in the ranks here. Here come the Warns of Elos Tyrion. I mean, between them and the Rhudaur Rangers, this could be a lot of damage being dealt very quickly. There's also the Troll Hunters, of course, but I don't know. I don't really know. The Grey Company actually do still have a bit of ammunition as well, and they position themselves just so to shoot down the line. So, once again, very good use of the Grey Company. Ooh, yeah, and that is a big old rout from the defenders there. The additional support from the Grey Company making all the difference. Blackguard of Barad-dûr taking a lot of damage. They didn't actually push all the way through there, but they were certainly the catalyst for progress there. The Grey Company finish things off. Morquendi Glade Lords being used defensively. Dunedain Peacekeepers now charging through the gaps that have been made, and the Glade Lords can turn around, but they didn't get a charge off there into the Dunedain. They don't want to be hanging around in melee for too long against those Axemen. Again, I'm not sure if committing more units to this at this point is necessarily a particularly good idea. Maybe hoping to blob them up and do more damage with those Rhudaur Rangers, which they are continuing to do, but I don't know, this is I'm only seeing all of this as good news for the attackers, to be honest. Maybe a good opportunity to use the Glade Lords in the interior of the settlement, which is easier said than done. It's a hard settlement to use cavalry in the inside of. Still no real movement over on this front line over here though. Another unit of Imladris sentries has been moved forward. As a result, this front line are Glade Masters as well, so this fight is still very much at a stalemate, but Fountain Guard on the way forward, you always get the sense that the attackers have got more left to give. And as the battle wears on, that becomes less and less the case for the defenders. back down the hill. Gondor Legion loitering around. And the Gaias. No, I mean, the fact that a lot of these are phalanx units is probably not great for Dorwinion, even if the Glade Masters are a really scary unit in melee. They and the Palace Guard are very similar in the sense that they don't really have much in the way of weaknesses, to be fair. They've got an anti-cavalry bonus, they win against armour, fantastic melee defence, good base stats, Swiss Army knife of units really, but there's only so many of them, and being held at arm's length perhaps by pikes and the two-handed spears that are the Fountain Guard is one way of dealing with them efficiently. While Glade Lords are still over here, a unit of Glade Guard, which we did see briefly, coming over here to try and lend a hand. They're going to deal with the remnants of those Dunedain, which have been charged by the Orikwendi Glade Lords. Mithlon Swordmasters and Rhudaur Berserkers actually coming down here now to support the Lindon units that are here. And they're going to make very quick work indeed of the Evandin Spearmen that they perceive. Further up here, Uruk Captains. Victory seems certain for them alongside the Gondor Infantry. I mean, again, they have that little focus with their armour piercing, but they're still going to be individually superior to these Lindon Infantry. More reinforcements coming down here though, Witcher Enslavers and Mithlon Swordmasters, so this is actually quite interesting. We've got more or less a counter-attack on the cards here by the defenders, trying to maybe take advantage of some gaps in the attackers' thinking. I mean, the attackers still have a lot of their units pretty far away as far as reinforcements go, so maybe they're hoping to completely cripple their ability to continue fighting over here. And I mean, committing the Witcher Enslavers would certainly lead you to believe that. I mean, there's a lot of high damage units here. There's the Glade Guard from Dorwinion, the Swordmasters from Lindon. Obviously the Enslavers and the Berserkers represent the very best of the Rhudaur infantry as well, so the armour piercing will be coming in very handy against Mordor, Gondor and Arthedain, who all have units struggling for dominance over here. Some dismounted Fornos Knights moving forward, close support coming now from the Ferodrum Javelins, so not bad this from the defenders. I mean, it's better than simply curling up into a ball and trying to retreat back to the final stand, because I feel like bottling yourselves up at this point is not really the way to be going. You may as well roll the dice a little bit to try and make up for the losses sustained in the earlier stages of the battle. Fountain Guard defeat seems certain. Only a military genius could win this battle. Only a military genius, eh? Must be pretty serious. The Catapult crew, out of ammunition, of course, something they share with Dale. Kind of like the look of that unit, to be fair. As far as your basic hastily armed woodsmen go, they're of course going to get absolutely massacred in melee if they are committed to this particular fight, but maybe 45 spare bodies is the sort of thing which will keep this keep the fires of this defensive line lit for just a little bit longer, although more pikes coming in. Yet another phalanx unit for this Dorwinion-led defence to try and deal with. And with Alcarondas Legion also on the way forward as well, I would be worried about their abilities to keep this going. Defeat is almost a certainty. I think at this point as well we're going to start to see the defenders have to make some choices, although to be honest they don't have anything really far back. I mean, they've got some Noldorin Guard back here from Lindon, few units up there, but for the most part with their big counter-attack they've got going on here, which is their main focus, I think, more and more Lindon units are pouring forward down here, Warns of the White Tower trying to salvage things, but I think what the defenders want is for this to go very well for them, and then they can refocus elsewhere, because they can't really retreat at this point. They need to keep committing units forward, because if they do retreat they're simply not going to have enough left in a final stand situation for it to be really any good. Orikwendi Glade Lords getting in behind enemy lines as well. I mean, there's still the Troll Slayers, a few marksmen, Athelian Rangers trying to bank their shots, and I mean this could be where the defenders do come unstuck a little bit, having to wade through Athelian Ranger fire. Gondor General falls. That sort of morale shock is the sort of thing which can affect Gondorians. Dismounted Fornos Knights are running for the hills. Mostly these reinforcements left do seem to be Arthedainian though, so I don't know necessarily. Lots of these Gondorians are routing now though. Walls of the White Tower and Pemberton. This is proving to be a very fruitful endeavour, this. It's just whether or not the defenders have got enough left in the tank to be able to carry this all the way through to the end game and victory. And the Blade Guard is still there. Little Swordmasters going around this fight alongside the Reforged Javelins. Maybe those Athenian Rangers are still such a problem, and I don't really think these Reforged Javelins should be coming back here and turning their backs to the Athenian Rangers. There's no need for any more units to be dealing with this. This is already too many, to be honest. They should be looking at either trying to shoot the Athenian Rangers with something they still have ammo in, or trying to engage them in melee. And that, I believe, was the Mordor general. Don't know necessarily how much Mordor have left. Reforged Javelins will be able to easily overcome a unit of Arthedain men-at-arms. Yeah, this is the right thing from Darth here. I mean, it's very risky, but you need to get those Athenian Rangers to stop shooting into your units, and that's exactly what he's managed to do. It's cost him this unit of Mithlon Swordmasters, but it's worth it as long as the defenders can reorganise themselves now. But I don't know if they're going to continue the assault forward. Maybe they are going to try and cut their losses here, but I'm not sure whether that's necessarily the best way of handling things. Over here, slowly but surely the attackers regaining dominance over this fight with the use of all of their throwing projectiles, and still the defenders having to commit more units in. So the out of ammunition Morroquendi bows are being sent in to try and shore things up, but it may prove to be futile. The catapult crew have been thrown in as well for good measure. Any fight involving pikemen is going to be a fairly elongated affair. And they do still have some more bows. They have the Hammer Guard, second unit of Glade Masters. So plenty of quality still left, but they have the quantity of units at this stage. What's going on here? One Rhudaur swordsman. We missed them engage with something then, I suppose. Tried to go around the houses a little bit, and there's a lot more units routing off over here as well. It's a little bit weird to see the green and blue routing with the red, but it is what it is. Meanwhile, yeah, we're seeing sort of a redoubled effort to try and counter-attack in. Some dismounted Fornoster Rhine Knights being sent forward by the Arthedainians. Try and add a little bit more quality to this front line. Further up though, more pikes, the sort of thing which may prove to be a bit of a problem. But Lindon with their own pikemen, and the Mithlon pikemen, certainly in damage dealing terms, will be able to outpace the Arthedainian ones. They can get those enslavers in and amongst them as well. These armoured men of the West will fall away pretty fast. Another unit of Black Bolts being sent in, and I mean the support of the Warns of Elos Tyrion. Yeah, this is exactly what you should be doing. I mean, just trying to kill off the Athenian Rangers here. More Arthedain infantry coming in now. Some Dunedain peacekeepers trying to keep things held down from the front. I mean, they'll do pretty well actually, not only against Rhudaur, but also against Lindon. They'll be able to deal with some good damage, but even still, more units just being thrown forward. Dunedain Troll Slayers are going to try and get some close-range javelin shots, but it doesn't look like they're going to be afforded that luxury. Arthedain so far are clinging on the front line. The Athenian Rangers still doing their thing. Warns of the North ready as well. Elder Enway Spearmen are being sent over here. Perhaps that they see that if the defenders win over there, it will be entirely incumbent upon Umbar and Imladris to see their team over the line, and maybe getting a little bit too comfortable over here, both of these players. They still have plenty left in the tank, but not enough really committed. I mean, they will win over on this choke point over here if they just commit forward a few more units. Given what's left, that should be Umbar's responsibility, really. One Sword Masters on the way forwards. Morroquendi bows. Maybe a little bit of routing could be possible, but the Dorwinion Riverwoods just being taken off the front line for the time being. Alcarondas Legion doing their thing. Definitely need to keep the Imladris sentries and Balagaya pikes on the front line. That's one of the reasons why this fight has been such an awkward beast for the defenders to have to deal with. One Swordmasters as well. Defeat seems certain. They're freshly arrived, but I mean, good thing they were freshly arrived because they're now the only defenders left. A little bit desperate over here now as Lindon tried to cling on. Blade Masters being sent forward. Individual units like this being sent forward, I don't really agree with. I think they're going to need more, which is why I think the Noldor and Guard are on the way. But need to get those units in there as quickly as possible. Doesn't matter how well they do over here if they end up crumbling over on the other side. And of course now, with the freshly arrived Elder Enway, no longer are they dealing with rank and file Arthedainians. They're having to deal with the very best that the High Elves have to offer. They do have some good armour piercing in here with the Berserkers, Ferocian Javelins, some Black Wolves that still live, and obviously the Guttram Slavers. So all of that armour piercing actually will be useful against the High Elven spears, but things are going to be making slower progress, certainly now, the defenders, and they kind of needed to continue apace. Noldor Guard being sent forward over here as well, so I do appreciate the counter-attack that the defenders have laid on over here, that instead of retreating back to the final layer, which we very often see on this map, they've decided to throw caution to the wind and make up for the early game a little bit here. And I mean, I think it's probably the better way of doing things, because if they just retreated into their shell, like I said, I don't think it would have gone all that well for them. You can see here another aggressive action coming from Lindon with the Noldor Guard moving forwards. I mean, they won't relish the idea of facing Troll Slayers in melee, but there's enough of them that they will be utterly overwhelmed, and the Troll Slayers formation is a little bit cracked at this point. Close range armour piercing projectiles though from the Warns of the North, and that's the thing, as valiant as this effort from the defenders is, I'm not certain whether they're going to have the manpower to continue this through, especially with Adin Men's Umbar army still having yet another wave in them essentially. I think with the Gwaith the Arthedain being committed though, that will represent Imladris having everything in melee, or at least close enough to melee for it to count. Noldor Guard victory seems certain, trying to push forward with their pikes, but the formation is not ideal, and between the Noldor Guard and the Morquendi Glade Masters, things are looking maybe a little bit dicier now for the attackers. Gwaith the Arthedain on the march. Balagaya Archers, do they still have a bit of ammo? Looks like they do, they're just electing not to use it yet. Adin Men hoping he can be the closer for his team, but it's going to come really at the expense of most of his allies at this point. There is always the danger as well that he waits too long, and this consistent counter-attacking from the defenders eventually does pay dividends. Sentries moving forward, trying to help shore things up. The Noldor Guard, I think, see that and are trying to get into close quarters with them. As good as the Imladris sentries are, any pike is going to be relatively poor in close quarters. Morquendi Gladelaw's still alive, and they've very much proven to be worthwhile. Again, like I said, cavalry like this is very difficult to use effectively in a settlement like Bersergath, and I have to say, I think Diego has done a pretty good job with that, but you can see here Warns of the North, Elder Enway Swordmasters and the Gwaith Mirdain have now also arrived from Imladris to try and help shore things up over here. Big units to have to try and take on, so Imladris keeping this assault going, and you can see the Gwaith Mirdain going AP infantry to AP infantry with the Guttram Slavers. You give the Gwaith Mirdain the edge in that battle at the best of times, and they're much fresher than the equivalent Rhudaur units at this point, but those Elder Enway Spearmen completely gone at this point. Do they have enough? Can the defenders muster enough strength left to be able to win this? I mean, they've got some Harlan Guard. What do they have left to commit? Harlan Guard. I mean, another unit of Noldor Guard and another unit of Noldor Blade Masters. I mean, they should win over here, the defenders. It's whether or not they can finish off that final wave of Umbarim on the other side, like I said, which includes Harbingers of Castamere, some armour piercing in the Balakathax Guard. It's definitely a close run thing though. I mean, we're into the final 10k frames now. Yeah, it says that the defenders are 2% down, which I can certainly believe. They've probably been fighting back from a deficit for most of this battle, but it's a deficit I feel like they would have felt like they can try and make that up. I mean, they still have some pikes as well, which, as I've often said, pikes can be a huge difference maker in the late game of a big siege battle like this. More Umbar units now being sent forward. The Balakathax Guard handling the damage, and the Gwaith Arthedain are going to be extremely difficult for the defenders to get rid of. One of the tankiest infantry units that the game has to offer when all stats are considered. Once again, the Noldorin Guard being used as a bit of a cudgel. Gwaith Arthedain being sent off the front line, and that means they're really just burrowing ever deeper into the waiting Umbar Axeman. And what's going on over here? Dorwinion Rhudaur still struggling. Mithlon Swordmasters doing a good job. The Morroquendi Blade Masters depleted. Whereabouts? I mean, if I were Diego at this point, I'd be seriously considering getting the Hammer Guard in there, because that armor piercing edge would be extremely useful at defanging, maybe is the wrong word, but dealing with the Gwaith Arthedain. And if you leave it too long, they're not going to have the numbers to make the difference maybe you would require. They're going to need support around them. Gwaith Arthedain balance of forces is evenly matched. It's a very close run thing. I think with the Lindon reinforcements though, they should be fine. There's Nazgul in here, is there? I think it's Nazgul. Yes it is. 2 of them remain though. Very bold effort from the defenders this. Lots of the damage dealing units from Rhudaur backed up by the solid Noldorin units and pikes from Lindon. And it has had the desired effect over here, you'd have to say. And this unit of Noldorin Guard in behind enemy lines as well is done very, very well. Not without support, of course, but they are going to finish off the Wards of the North, and that will include the Arthedain General. That will pretty much be the end of Arthedain. I don't know actually, with 27 of them, 52 Noldorin Guard, maybe. I think the Wards of the North would still win that fight actually, but you can see here that the Elves trying to peel themselves off this front line, but I think it might be a little bit late for that. I think the damage they've taken might be a bit much. They're going to have to just sort of stick it out. There's one Troll Slayer against one Glade Guard. Back the Troll Slayer. More on that later. Yeah, I mean this is a bit of a concern. Warns Valos Tyrion moving over here to try and help shore things up, but another unit of Balakathax Guard, the weight of the Umbar numbers that they still have left may be starting to squeeze on the defenders. Morroquendi bows will get in front of the Warns of Valos Tyrion to block the charge from the Axe Guard. There's still that unit of Hammer Guard. There's also the Noldorin Blade Masters, which have been repositioned over to here along with the Harlingen Guard, maybe as a necessity, because this is where the attackers are at their strongest now after all. Over on the other side, whoever wins, it's going to be fairly Pyrrhic at this point, so it's going to come down more and more to this fight over here. Keep one eye on that unit of Hammer Guard. Without the support of the Noldorin units over here though, that they might have pushed their luck with their units over here a little bit too far, especially seeing as the quality aspect of it was being handled by Rhudaur, and their high-end units are very, very damaging, but they're also fragile by elite unit standards, so still a few Berserkers remaining. Slavers are there. The Rhudaur General falls. Wards of the North are also going to be able to shoot into the backs here of the Noldorin Guard, which is going to be a real problem. Outmaneuvered, and these kind of individual battles between units are how this overall battle is going to be decided. And as well as the defenders have done to rally and charge the attackers back significantly, I mean, you can see this is where, as far as the attackers got with that push from the Grey Company, the Black Guard of Barad-dûr, before the counter-attack then came, they got pushed all the way back down, basically, past the initial point. But I don't know if that's going to be enough. I don't know whether the defenders are going to have quite enough left in the tank to necessarily win there. Still got some ammunition in their standard Harland and Guard, which I mean is better than nothing. definitely the sort of thing which can help out against unshielded units like the Balakath Axe Guard. You can see that is what a fairly large amount of the attacking force over here is now made up of. Looks like they are out of ammo in their Wards of Velosteria. Hoping that those archers can do an awful lot of heavy lifting at this point. I think this is pretty much everything though at this point. The only thing that isn't committed, I think, is the Harbingers of Castamere, who are waiting back down here indeed. Other than that, everything is committed, but yeah, maybe a little bit too late for the Hammer Guard. If they'd been committed earlier when the front line was still a little bit further forwards, things could have been a little bit different. I mean, they will be very good against all of these Umbar units and even the Imladris ones, but they're more or less on their own. There's not many Wardens left. I mean, if the Noldorin Blade Masters, they may as well throw themselves into melee at this point. Retreating isn't really going to help them out, and if they were going to be committed over to the other side, they should have been left over there in the first place. And again, maybe this sort of decision making could have been better, but if it hadn't been for the attackers' aggression and committing their units where they did, they would never have fashioned this opportunity to recover for themselves. But yeah, a very narrow victory, you'd have to say, from the attackers over here. There's still got some Gwaithir Myrdain, some Elvenway Swordmasters and some Wardens of the North, but that's it. I mean, it's going to be under 50 units total that are victorious, but that is going to be enough to force the Lindon Swordsmen to come over here to meet their challenge. And the Harlanden Guard now out of ammunition, so they will be committed forward to try and back up the Hammer Guard in this fight. They won't be able to do much damage of their own to the kind of units they're facing off against here. But such is the way of things. A little bit of damage being done by the Corsair crossbows as well, and little examples like that of the attackers just doing enough damage with their skirmishes here and there. Also a real difference maker in this fight, you'd have to say. And now that will mark everything being committed, because the Harbingers of Castamere trying to come in here to be the thing which finally push the defenders over the edge. One Nazgul on the way, so Mordor still very much a part of this battle as well. Wards of the North actually losing there. Losing fairly handily at that. As you'd expect, they've already seen a lot of combat, and the Noldorin Blade Masters are a dedicated heavy sword unit. The Arthedain General, who was riding his luck, to be fair, against Lindon earlier, finally does perish at their hands. That's going to be Arthedain gone. Now they're going to double back. What have we got going on over here? So we've got 3 Morroquendi bows facing off against 1 Nazgul. I don't think the Morroquendi bow is going to necessarily have the damage necessary to deal with this guy. Indeed, one of them falls, the other 2 wait politely. Fortunately, the Blade Masters are there to bail them out. Defeat seems certain. Elval and Hammerguard not necessarily going to have the survivability, the melee defense to be able to ride out that storm. Alcarondas Legion. The Noldorin Blade Masters need to get onto this front line. They need to stop messing around with that 1 Nazgul, to be honest. As antagonising as having that Nazgul in melee is, like, he isn't going to be all that important in the grand scheme. I don't think it matters anyway. I think the attackers have simply got too much left. As good as the Blade Masters are, this isn't... The shape of this engagement is going to be all wrong for Lindon as well. They arrived too late. Like, by the time they arrived, you could see that a fire was lit under Umbar and Imladris a little bit there, because they pushed through the deteriorating front line. And it worked out for them. Fine margins, though, this battle was ultimately decided by. There were so many different things that could have gone differently. I have to say, it's one of the more entertaining battles on Bersergath we've seen in quite a while. So a fitting end to all of the battles that Winged Swordsman 44 has sent me, even if it is a map we've seen many, many times before. But another good example of these battles which, one after another, it's seemingly been, where the defenders have counter-attacked and actually been pretty effective at it. On one occasion it was enough for them to win the battle, and the other 2 it was enough for them to be very competitive and take the battle really to the late game. While the attackers may well have still won, I feel as though in both cases, if they had simply retreated, it would have been a more domineering victory from the attackers, which this certainly was not. There goes Elrond. One last spit in the eye, perhaps, you could view that as. And close as well. 3% the difference. The hallmark of a close battle. Noldor and Blade Masters will not go down without a fight. I'll be interested to see how well they do in the Shock Infantry knockout tourney, which will probably be the next one we do. And it will probably be fairly soon as well, but more on that in the end game splash screen. The bearded elf falls. You can see here Blythe the Arthedain still very tough. Corsair crossbow is going to line up and shoot the Noldor and Blade Masters down, which is an inglorious end to what has been a very brave stand and a pretty effective counter-attack by the defenders, but they did give themselves a lot to do based on some of the early game shenanigans that went on, but you have to say most of the time that was actually just the attackers playing quite well. I have to ask the question, if all of those Elven infantry weren't killed off by the Grey Company and the artillery, would that have been enough to make a difference? Quite possibly. You never can tell what sort of snowball effect changing something like that would have. Victory seems certain. Defeat seems certain. I was going to say victory seems certain. That's a very optimistic appraisal of the situation there by the remaining Lindon elves. And that is going to be that. Only one remains. And there we have it. Few plumes of smoke rising from some of these buildings, but yes, a good battle in the end. I was a little bit worried in the early games. I'm sure you could tell that this was going to turn into a relatively predictable battle on Bersergath, of which we've seen far too many already, but it wasn't. Hopefully, well, I will say that this is going to be the last battle we see on Bersergath for a good long while. I'm talking about, like, way into 2023 is when I would be wanting to do this again if we manage to make it that far. So yeah, with that, that's actually a pretty good sign off for the map on a temporary basis. So yeah, big thank you to Winged Swordsman 44 for sending this one in. Having a look at the performances from the players, it's kind of hard to differentiate because I don't think anyone really played. There was no one that stood out for doing something different from their team. Like, all three of the defenders were part of the counter-attacking, were part of manning the front lines and defending quite well. The differences in kills are mostly going to come down to how well they were able to position their skirmishers, which it makes sense maybe that Rhudaur had the most in that regard, because they're going to have more throwing projectiles, able to do more damage more quickly, especially to those blobs. And the attackers as well, there wasn't really much to differentiate the attackers. It really just, the only difference making there is maybe, Umbar getting the least amount of kills, but then they were the ones to have the strength in the late game to just about see the attackers over the edge. You could say that Ellipsis with his Grey Company, and in the early game, Proxima Centauri's good play with the Troll Catapult and his Orc Javelins and stuff like that, while his army did fade towards the end. That early game play was enough to open up the initial lead, which the attackers just about managed to keep going all the way till the end game, so that actually did prove to be fairly decisive in the end, I think. Having a look what did the damage for Rhudaur, then we have some Witch Realm Enslavers doing quite well with 161 kills, committed earlier than maybe they would otherwise be. Arthedain Berserkers, maybe you'd be hoping for a little bit more from them, given the fact that they do have that throwing projectile first, as well as being very effective armor-piercing melee units. One unit for Rodram Javelin's doing very well. 289 kills is probably the best performance we've seen from them in a long time. 535 on the Rangers. Again, if you're defending in a 5v3, over 500 kills is kind of what you want to be aiming for with the Rangers, so I'd say that's highly acceptable from them. No one really getting underneath 100 kills in the important units anyway. Arthedain Pikemen getting under that, but then they're more of a defensive bulwark anyway, and the unit above that way outperformed it. Black Walls maybe not living long enough to truly make the most of their abilities. And the Rhudaur Swordsmen, they were certainly more of a functional unit. One unit breaking 100 kills, which, considering how basic this unit is fairly impressive in and of itself. But other units only getting 8 and 11. I mean, they were getting hit pretty bad by stuff like Grey Company and the archers down on the lower level from Arthedain and Gondor. So that is all that can be done for that. Irregardless, big thank you once again. As far as what's going to be happening soon, I've already alluded to it slightly. There is going to be another knockout tourney, which I hope will be happening within the next this far out, because at this point I have recorded a month in advance out of necessity, so hopefully I'll be looking within the next 2 to 3 weeks maximum. We'll be doing the next knockout tourney video, and that would be the shock infantry. Be interesting to see what they do. I mean, perhaps it's a little bit more of a natural test for them as well, in comparison to the lance cavalry and the shielded infantry that we have already done. Although from my perspective the shielded infantry video isn't out yet, so hopefully that one went down just as well as the first one. As far as what's coming out replay wise, I am actually running the well a little bit dry here. I mean, like I said, I'm recording a fair ways in advance, so I'm recording in bulk most of the time when I can. The only ones that I've got in the chamber so far is the pitch siege battle hybrid thing that was sent to me by Filler, which I'll be recording next, and that will be the very next video that comes out in Reforged. I also have another RP battle from Silmarillion, so that will also be something that is going to be coming out in the next couple of weeks or so. Also, finally, I do feel confident enough that I have the information necessary to do the live stream channel update, which will be a sort of Q&A, and then, I mean, first and foremost, it will be about getting across information about what the channel is going to be doing in the short, medium, and long term. And I think I have all of the information necessary to be able to say that with some authority now. Things are looking up, which is good. So yeah, that I will be looking at doing that. I'll probably be having a week off at some point in July as well, because I feel as though I'll be away for 3 weeks, so I will have built up enough weekend off days to be able to take a whole week off. And I think whenever that week may be, what would be the normal Wednesday slot for a bit of content, instead that day we'll be doing a Q&A, which will probably be, it'll be mid-July, I think. Mid to late July is when we can expect to see that. So do tune in for that, because it will be good info on what's going to be happening with the channel. And of course it won't just be a Q&A as well. We will be looking at doing something that day, whether it's looking at some updates from Silmarillion, maybe looking a little bit at some of the screenshots maybe from the upcoming patch which is being worked on for Third Age Reforged. Maybe that's another good idea as well. But yeah, that's something else to consider. Irregardless, that's something. So we've got live stream channel update, another knockout tourney video. Still got a couple of replays in Reforged and in Silmarillion as well, but being this far out, I'll probably get sent more between now and when I'm actually going to be recording in bulk again, so we'll have to wait and see. It's one of those things. While I can always plan myself out in a general sense in the short term, I can never be too specific, because plans can be quite malleable in this current time. So yeah, it is what it is. Either way, enough rambling from myself. Yeah, big thank you to Wingswordsman44 and all the players once again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.